About the dismissive avoidant attachment style and some of their healthy and unhealthy patterns as it relates to sex. So, first and foremost, DAs are usually quite good with their boundaries. They are not ones to do something that doesn't feel right for them. Of course, we can have people pleasing DAs at times, but we're likely to see if a dismissive avoidant does or doesn't want to do something, they'll speak up and they will express about it. They're quite good at taking themselves into consideration, which is a really important part of intimate connection. If we're not able to take ourselves into consideration, then we really end up with a one-way connection. And DAs can be good at caring about their relationship to sex and being authentic in their relationship to sex, which ultimately promotes healthy sexuality as a whole. And if we're not able to be true to ourselves, authentic and courageous enough to speak up and share ourselves when it comes to sex, then we're going to find a lot of painful limitations. So these are some fantastic strengths. Now, on the more unhealthy side, sometimes we'll see that the DA is not fully present with the other person. This can be for a variety of different reasons. We may find DAs are more interested in body-based sex at times. This is absolutely not the case for all DAs, nor is it all the case for all DAs in relationships. But sometimes there is a certain percentage of DAs that do not want to be emotionally available or emotionally vulnerable because it really ignites their worst fears at a subconscious level. And so sometimes you will find a portion of DAs who invest more time in purely body-based sex and just want that connection without the having to overcome their fears of emotional intimacy, and that interdependence between the different pillars that relate to intimacy as a whole. And another portion of DAs will see sometimes feel completely unsafe even moving in the direction of sex unless there's an established intellectual, if not also emotional connection, because DAs can feel very unsafe when it comes to relating to other people and anything related to opening up or being vulnerable as a whole. In some portion of DAs as well, we'll see DAs try to stay away from anything that makes them feel uncomfortable. Too much cuddling, too much intimacy, too much closeness and connection. Again, this tends to run in complete parallel to like the state of the relationship for the DA. Are they feeling safe in the connection? Are they open to working on their fears as it relates to sex and emotional intimacy? Or are these things that the dismissive avoidance is quite shut down to at this time? Now, dismissive avoidance can feel a lot of pressure and put a lot of pressure on themselves related to sex and related to performance. And they tend to dislike the vulnerability of sex to a certain degree. If there's a lot of expectation of vulnerability that comes with sex, with the partner that they're in the sexual relationship with or sexual interaction with. And dismissive avoidance as well can put a lot of pressure on themselves, and they can very easily get into a position where if they feel like they're not performing, they'll feel shame. Their mind's core wound will come up as I'm defective. And I've seen a lot of dismissive avoidance over the years openly communicate in the private practice I ran about how anything related to sexual performance, if they ever felt like their performance was struggling, or they weren't at their best, or they weren't feeling fully present during sex, that they could get really, really down on themselves in their mind, and they could really shame themselves, and this just would spiral, right? Like this just snowballs the experience where it's like you're already not present, then you're investing and then shaming yourself at the same time, and all that's going to make you do is want to withdraw, hide, push away, disconnect, and that only further affects the sexual experience, for both you and for the other person in the experience as well. We'll also see dismissive avoidance sometimes quick, I would say dismissive avoidance more than anybody else, quick to allow their job or life stress to spill into their intimate connection. And this is because of the fact that they have sort of a shrunken emotional bandwidth to begin with. And because these pillars of intimacy all are interdependent, whether we like it or not, if one area of our lives is challenged, that's likely to very much affect the other area of our lives. Another really important piece that I've recognized over the years with dismissive avoidance is if they feel criticized by their partner overall, they are very unlikely to feel safe enough to be present during sex, which makes them more likely to feel shame around sex and feel not able to be present. Dismissive avoidance also, they're not in their body a lot of the time. I mean, they are to a certain degree, but they are spending a lot of time in their mind and very identified with thought, really experiencing life through the mental, intellectual faculties. And that's a way that their subconscious mind is used to adapt and keep them feeling safe. But what happens is sometimes when we're not present with our sexual experience, we're not engaged in it in the same way. And again, this creates disconnects, sort of puts up walls between ourselves and others, and inhibits our ability to enjoy the experience of sex. So we'll see a lot of these sort of different dynamics at play. I would also say that sometimes dismissive avoidance can hold on to feelings of criticism. So let's say, for example, the dismissive avoidant was criticized by their partner about not being helpful enough or not being a good listener, so something completely unrelated to sex. I notice that DAs will absolutely carry that into their intimate connection. It goes back to what we talked about earlier, where there's a lack of resolution in a relationship that can affect our experience in relationship to sex itself. And I find that DAs tend to have that correlation very strongly. If they're carrying a fear of criticism around some other part of life, they are quick to, at a subconscious level, assume that they will be criticized in relationship to sex or around sexual performance as well. I've also seen many DAs over the years, if they have one experience where there's pressure around sex, their partner is pressuring them to have sex more often, pressuring them to be more engaged during sex, pressuring them about why the relationship about sex has changed, DAs tend to have difficulty receiving that and utilizing that conversation as sort of a foundational place to have deeper conversations from. And instead, often a DA will just feel shame and again, just clamp down, hide even more, disconnect even more. And it has a tendency to move in the opposite direction. And again, this is because that shame core wound can be really strong. The I am defective core wound can be so strong for a DA. Now, another thing that I want to highlight here, sometimes dismissive avoidance will feel shame around expressing their own sexual preferences and needs directly. They may try to do so more indirectly through initiating something or trying something new. But if that feels shut down, DAs are quick to often shut down in response. And then it can be difficult for them to really want to open back up. They tend to have a huge need to feel safe with somebody in order to feel like their relationship around sex can truly be thriving long term. Sometimes we'll see dismissive avoidance have more like body-based sex in the short term, but long term, some of the key elements a dismissive avoidant needs for the relationship to sex to really thrive is safety, a sense of approval, acknowledgement, appreciation, and a sense of supportiveness in trying new things, supportiveness in understanding their needs. And whenever there's a feeling of judgment, criticism, volatility, they can be very quick to shut down in this area and not even want to put much effort into the relationship or into improving the sexual connection. So these are all really important points to acknowledge. Now, some of the core wounds that I'll often see with the dismissive avoidant and the relationship to sex are things like I am trapped, really being adverse to feeling like I am pressured, so less of a core wound, but just a pain point of belief in general. I am unsafe, big core wound. I am misunderstood. I am defective. These are all huge for DAs. If they are present in almost any form in the relationship to sex, they are going to affect sexual connection, the availability to be present, feeling comfortable being vulnerable, feeling comfortable working on the relationship to sex. So these things really need to be acknowledged and worked through as the individual in this experience. And it's really important to heal the relationship to sex using things like vulnerability, openness, communication, absence of criticizing oneself, absence of shaming oneself, honesty, and seeing openness as courageous instead of weak. So in the next part of this module, I'm going to go through some key tools that you can use as a dismissive avoidant to start really healing and transforming anything that may be standing in your way of having a thriving, safe, comfortable relationship to your own sexuality and in your interpersonal relationship to romantic partners. So some key tools to begin healing and transforming your relationship to sex as a dismissive avoidant is number one, practicing vulnerability. So vulnerability is not an easy thing to practice, but it involves you being able to be more present, open up, and share a little bit more about your feelings and needs in relationship to sex. Now, this is a really important part for a dismissive avoidant, because sometimes dismissive avoidants are good at sharing their needs through actions, through initiating something, but this is very different from communicating, because communicating forces you to put your truth into words, which can feel like a much more vulnerable experience. So this, as a practice, would be for you to be able to talk about the things that are important to you in sex or interest you, especially if you can do it right before or right after having sex, because there's that actual intimate interaction that takes place. And so it may feel like a scary time, but it's a perfect time to be able to practice this. And it's really fantastic exposure work around opening up, showing your truth, being yourself, and it's going to increase the chances that you get to feel understood and seen by your partner or loved one. And so in this situation, what this would look like is you saying something like, following the statements on your sheet: I appreciate when we, I like when we XYZ, I would prefer if we could XYZ, hey, I don't really love when we XYZ, and just inserting something in there and then practicing saying that in your relationship. The more you do this, the more comfortable communication is going to feel. This really truly applies to every insecure attachment style. It's really important to do this work. The more we communicate, the more comfortable and normalized it becomes, the easier all this stuff feels, period. And the more likely we are to feel successful and connected. And again, like we can thrive in this area of our lives. Number 2, this is a really powerful exercise for DAs. It's the ability to be present through mindfulness. Now, this is really important for anyone with an avoidant side to their attachment style. And the key here is to practice noticing the experience of sex. It really helps you get into your body. Sometimes DAs can get really busy in their minds, and it actually makes them sort of have sex through a filter of an invisible wall. It's like you're thinking about an experience or judging yourself or judging, the experience, or even disconnecting by thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow or what happened yesterday. And it puts this barrier between yourself and somebody else in the interaction. When you can actually sit and practice noticing the sensations, noticing what you're feeling literally through your 5 senses, what you're seeing, get really present, what you're feeling, the sensations, the feeling of touch, all of these different things, as you can go through those sensations, period, and just focus in on one at a time, it helps you actually become more mindful, more focused, more present. And that is actually what's going to empower you to get into more of a flow-like state, where you're not too concerned and worried about everything, but can actually enjoy the experience and allow it to unfold. And this is usually when interactions and connections are the best. For both individuals participating. So really powerful exercise. There's some mindfulness tips in your workbook as well, and some key sensations just to practice tuning into. Number 3 is practicing removing pressure and around sexual performance. And this is huge. So what I want you to do here is make a list of all of the expectations you have of yourself as it relates to sex, in terms of like how much you think you should be having sex, how often, how you should be performing. Just write any thoughts that come to mind, and really question in that following column of your chart: are these expectations that I have of myself fair? And are these expectations that I have of myself realistic? And thirdly, are these expectations of myself promoting a healthy sexual experience? And if you have all these really intense expectations and then you minimize yourself accordingly, or there are things that you can't live up to, then I want you to be able to consciously recognize that. Sometimes we allow these things to sort of run us because we're not allowing these things to come all the way to our conscious mind, so we can recognize this is even taking place to begin with. Tool number 4 is being able to practice encouraging yourself, or recognizing your courage, your strength, empowering attributes and traits, instead of shaming yourself. And so what this exercise asks you to do is just sit down and write a list out of all the different places you notice shame come up for yourself, all the different places that you shame yourself without consciously realizing in the relationship to sex. Do you shame yourself for not lasting long enough, for being in a position where you feel like you're not attractive enough? Do you judge or shame yourself for not pleasuring the other person enough? Do you judge or shame yourself for the way you move around sex? There can be so many different ways that we have these sort of ideas about how we're supposed to behave, and unfortunately we get a lot of these things from unhealthy models in our culture, or through pornography, or through things that are not necessarily a realistic depiction of what sex should be like between two people 24/7. And so what we want to be able to do is just recognize, try to make a bit of a shame journal around all the places you make yourself out to be shameful or defective in some form. And what I want you to do instead is equilibrate this stuff through cognitive reframes, through looking at these things through a different lens. Instead of thinking, oh, I'm defective because I have a need that's different from my partner, think of why that's appropriate, why that's sufficient, why that's okay, why that's normal. And you want to work to reframe the way you're thinking about yourself that's causing the output of shame. And if you reframe the thought patterns and the way you see yourself, then you're going to change the emotional output that follows. Really, really powerful exercise for dismissive avoidance. And our last major tool here that's very beneficial is practicing acknowledging what makes you feel safe. It may sound funny to a lot of dismissive avoidance because you may think, no, I don't need to do that, I'm fine. But the reality is you will naturally feel more connected, more present, and more empowered in your relationship to sex the more you feel safe with your partner. And I want you to make a list about everything, not just things that are happening inside the bedroom. So things like the way you communicate on a regular basis, how much criticism exists in the relationship or absence of criticism, just the way you feel emotionally connected, the way you feel intellectually connected, the way other pillars of intimacy are taking place, if you feel like conflicts are resolved in relationships. So write out all of the things about the connection overall that make you feel safe, and write out the things that make you feel unsafe. And another word you could use instead of unsafe is uncomfortable or disconnected. And what I want you to do is share these things with your partner. And it's very vulnerable. I understand it can be really scary, but share some of these things. Hey, I notice when I feel criticized in this area, it also makes me feel disconnected sexually from the relationship. These things tend to interact, and what I need is for you to communicate with more kindness and consideration and a little more gently. And I think that will have a positive impact on these other parts of our relationship. There's no other attachment style more than DAs where these things are so interconnected. How the emotional connection or intellectual connection will affect the sexual connection, especially in an interpersonal relationship. So I'm not talking about like somebody you meet and you have body-based sex with. I'm talking about like in our actual relationship dynamics. And so this is really important for a DA to address and acknowledge and resolve. So the steps there that are outlined are for you to be able to acknowledge the things that make you feel unsafe, uncomfortable, disconnected, and share that there's a relationship that impacts that with sex, and then share what you need to take place instead to promote more safety and comfort in the holistic view of the relationship, which will inevitably, as a DA, promote more safety and comfort around sex. And the more comfort and safety we have, the less pressure there is, the better we feel, the more present we can become. And again, these are all very important dynamics that lead to a thriving sexual interaction. So really powerful places to start. I would do the journaling about your needs once per week. Take the time to be conscious in your relationship to sex by exploring these things. Practice mindfulness whenever you're having sex, or even just on a daily basis to strengthen your ability to be mindful. You can practice mindfulness for 30 minutes when you wake up in the morning, when you get ready, brush your teeth, wash your face, all these different things. You can use mindfulness tools in there. So that you can build your mindfulness muscles and then take them more easily into your sexual interactions and experiences. And I really recommend communicating and speaking up once per week, and really working on doing some of those cognitive reframes around shame or core limiting beliefs on a daily basis until you see relief from those things, not just in your relationship to sex, but also in other areas of your life. So I hope this gives you a really strong foundation to start from, and I hope we're excited to dive into the fearful avoidant and their relationship to sex in the next module. So let's talk about the fearful avoidance relationship to sex. Some healthy characteristics they usually carry in the relationship to sex are: number one, they usually have quite a capacity to be fairly present during their relationship to sex, at least with the other person, and at times with their own feelings and needs and desires. They do tend to value and care about sex as a whole, and they do tend to monitor a little bit in their romantic relationships how the sexual connection is, and be very willing and motivated to do the work on that. If they feel like the sexual connection is sort of tailoring off, if there's some sort of disconnect, they tend to be quite aware about it, and they tend to take action to try to improve that area of the relationship. They care to make an effort regarding the other person's experience, regarding their own experience, though sometimes they can feel afraid a little bit to do so. They tend to enjoy sex and see sex as both a strategy for physical and emotional connection. Now, some of the unhealthy components of the fearful avoidance relationship to sex are that they often feel like sex is about earning their worth. If they participate well in sex, if they perform well in sex, sometimes they can feel like, oh, then I'm worthy of my partner, or then I'm worthy of this relationship, or then I earn more significance or approval, or I become more lovable. And sometimes this can lead also to being in like a power struggle with sex. Where they feel if they don't trust their partner, or they're losing trust, or feel suspicious of their partner, they use sex as a strategy to like reconnect. Sometimes they can hold sex over a partner's head, like, oh, I'm not going to have sex with you unless you XYZ, and can use it as sort of this like transactional thing instead of recognizing it as an important part of connection in relationships. And sometimes we'll see as well, fearful avoidance defy their own needs and boundaries in sex to please somebody else, or again to earn their worth from somebody else, especially if they feel like that person that they're connecting to, they're trying to garner more emotional connection from through sex, or they're trying to gather more approval from or get closer to, and then sex sort of becomes used as a tool as opposed to a healthy internal and interdependent relationship to sex between two individuals. Sometimes we'll see as well fearful avoidance and become resentful if they find themselves violating their own boundaries, like, not expressing their own needs and always prioritizing what the other person needs, or not speaking up about their own desires, always following what the other person's desires are. And sometimes they'll feel frustrated and then turn around and kind of like push a person away, or again go into that sort of transactional space where they withdraw or withhold sex. Sometimes we'll see as well fearful avoidance not trust or not feel completely trusting with a partner, and that can bleed into the relationship to sex also, where they don't end up trusting somebody sexually, and they can feel sort of disconnected there, or put their walls up and participate sometimes in an experience where they don't feel fully aligned intrinsically, because fearful avoidance can really hold on to emotions, and when things don't feel resolved, it absolutely creates barriers in their connection in their interpersonal relationships to sex. Fearful avoidance can also sometimes find themselves in like a comparison space around sex, comparing their sexual relationship to their partner's past sexual partners or relationships, and they can get really preoccupied there at times. They can find different jealousy components arise around sex or sexuality, or sexual expression. And again, they can really find that their trust issues are even easily triggered if the sex life changes in a relationship. So it's not just like trust triggering sex, but it can also be a change in sex triggering trust. It can really go both ways. And sometimes we'll also see a perfectionism components with fearful avoidance, feeling like they don't even want to have sex unless they are feeling perfect in terms of like the way they feel about their looks, their body, the relationship. They can really put a lot of pressure that way, and they can feel a lot of shame if they feel like, again, similar to all other attachment styles, there's a problem when it comes to sexual performance, or the expectations they put on themselves are not being met. Now, some of the core wounds here that are really prevalent in this individual's relationship to sex are things like, I am unworthy, I will be betrayed or abandoned, I am not enough, I am powerless or helpless. And this really has to do with like them speaking up, communicating their needs, but feeling like they can't because then they won't earn their worth. They can sort of be caught between these two types of programming. And I am disconnected. They're very sensitive to disconnection. And sometimes too, fearful avoidance can be quite triggered by feeling unseen or unheard, or like their needs are not being made space for. So it's really important for the fearful avoidant when it comes to working on healing this relationship to sex that they focus on healing the trust in the relationship, openly communicating, having more honesty, taking themselves into consideration when it comes to their own needs, their own boundaries, their own feelings and desires, and really working through strong expectations they may have of themselves or any shame that comes up, and really changing the relationship to sex from being about something that's a tool to earn worth or to gain closeness or to get approval, and instead making it about the experience of sex itself, and that being a component or a pillar, like we keep talking about, of intimacy in general, ranging from mental and intellectual to emotional, physical, and sexual intimacy, and seeing that as a part of the holistic view of intimacy and connection, as opposed to a tool that helps us get those other things more. So in the next part of this module, we're going to go through and talk quite a bit about some key tools that you can utilize to heal your relationship to sex if you find yourself feeling stuck in any of these areas. So some key tools to heal your relationship to sex as a fearful avoidant is number one, to take time to equally consider your own feelings, needs, and desires around sex. Sometimes the fearful avoidant can be so focused on the other person's experience of sex that they totally forget to consider themselves, and this can be something that like chronically takes place for years, if not even decades, for this individual. So it's really important to take time to consider yourself. This is a key theme for fearful avoidance across all areas, and it especially applies to the relationship to sex. So you'll see in your workbook that you have a chart that asks you to introspect about your own feelings, your own needs, your own desires, and then to actually determine how much these things are fulfilled from 1 to 10, and to journal about these things and see what's important to you around your relationship to sex. And just explore this, and it doesn't have to be something you rush into. It can be something that you take the time to actually observe, notice, and consider over the course of literally days, weeks, months, even, as you get to know yourself more and more in this area. Then number two, another exercise here is for you to be mindful about your relationship to sex. This applies to more avoidant types. They tend to sometimes be not fully present in their experience and in their body, and they can get really sort of lost in thought that can interfere in their relationship to sex. And so this asks you in your relationship to sex to focus on sensory cues, feeling your kinesthetic senses, sight, touch, sound, and really focus in on one sensory experience at a time to really ground and anchor your attention into being able to be fully present in your experience of sex. And think of being fully present as being connected to the sensory experience more than identified with your thinking. And whenever we're identified with our thinking while having a sensory experience, we're disconnected from the experience itself by a certain degree. And so mindfulness is a wonderful tool to practice. And what I highly recommend doing is using mindfulness tools that are outlined in your workbook to practice mindfulness throughout your day. So having like a small morning routine around mindfulness, where maybe as you're getting ready for your day or getting ready for bed at the end of your day, you just notice all the different sensory experiences that you're going through. So let's say you're washing your face. You feel the coldness of the water on your face, and you feel the water dripping down your face, or streaming around your face, and you feel the suds of the soap or face wash sort of on your face as you're rubbing it. Like, you really tune into the sensory experience itself, and it really anchors you into the present moment and allows you to be focused on what you're doing. And sometimes when fearful avoidants are really in their head and they just practice anchoring themselves into the present moment, it absolves them of the things that were disconnecting them from the experience of sex itself. So sometimes, for example, if you're worried about, am I performing? Am I doing a good enough job? Is the person present? Are they interested in me? If you have all these racing thoughts that are actually affecting you being able to really connect with somebody, by focusing on mindfulness techniques and anchoring yourself back into the present moment, it really pulls you away from what was perhaps becoming a detrimental part of your interaction. So wonderful exercise to utilize in general. Number three, it's really important to practice just recognizing what your fears are about communicating your needs. And this will relate to some of your limiting beliefs. Are you afraid that if I ask for my needs to be met, I'll be a burden? If I don't please somebody enough and I end up focusing on myself a little bit, I'm unworthy. So try to really tune in here and explore, what are your core wounds that are showing up around you communicating? Do you feel like I'm shameful or defective if I communicate my own needs? If my needs are not a match to the other person's needs, that's gonna, get me abandoned? Or do you feel that I can't trust somebody enough to truly be myself around them sexually? So try to determine what your core wounds are that are affecting your relationship to sex, and then follow the reframing chart outlined in your workbook to rinse and repeat the reframes, because at the subconscious level, it's repetition plus emotion that reprograms. So when you're able to say, I can trust myself to communicate my needs, I can trust this person to be able to respond to me if I'm sharing my desires, like that's important to me in a relationship. The more you're reframing and finding evidence, the more you're getting that emotion and then the repetition, and it can be very powerful to transform these beliefs that you may have been carrying at a subconscious level for so long, acting as a barrier between yourself and your partner around sex that may not even be an accurate depiction of how you feel about this person from a more conscious perspective. So really reframing in there, seeing what you need to work on, seeing through a different lens, and then using repetition to reprogram. And the very last and most important tool here for fearful avoidance, arguably, is overcoming shame related to perfectionism. So I want you to make a list of all of the things that you shame or expect about yourself and feel shame accordingly when you're not up to par or not up to standard, and all the ways you inhibit yourself from just being present and being in your truth around sex because you have too high of expectations. I've heard people over the years say things like, I won't even have sex again until my body looks a certain way. Or I won't even have sex again until I feel I look a certain way. Or until I feel, comfortable enough with somebody that I've told them everything about my life. There can be all these barriers to just being yourself in regards to sex. And it's really important to identify and disconnect those barriers or dislodge them so that you can transform and feel comfortable and feel safe. So please write out the different expectations you're carrying, the different ways you may shame yourself. Do a cognitive reframe around the self-shaming and come up with a more realistic expectation to use in your relationship to sex. So instead of saying, I'll never have sex again, or I won't let anybody see my body until I look a certain way, how about something more realistic? Like, I will learn to honor and love my body as it is and share myself and my body with somebody I feel comfortable with and have built a trusting connection to. So really work on those cognitive reframes as much as you can and question those expectations you may be carrying that are driving your behavior at a subconscious level towards something that's not necessarily healthy or fair to you as a human being, and especially to this pillar of intimacy that will affect our relationships and partnerships. So with all of this, what I want you to do is spend some time introspecting about your needs and desires. Take some time to do that. That can be over the course of time. It doesn't have to be something you come up with tomorrow. And it can be something you build on as well. And then to have a little mindfulness practice, I would say the best thing to do is for 5 to 10 minutes a day is to practice a mindfulness tool. And again, make it a routine, like during your morning routine, your evening routine, your getting ready for the day routine, getting ready for bed routine, something that's already a routine in your life, you're just anchoring your awareness into and becoming more present. And then I would do the work through the charts and worksheets related to your attachment style so you can question some of the painful expectations you're carrying, reprogram some of these core wounds around sex, and really free yourself from these things, which will allow you to feel safe communicating, vocalizing your needs, sharing yourself, and these will all be important ingredients that allow your relationship to thrive as it relates to sex. That allows your relationship to feel safe, comfortable, open, exciting, and you'll feel safe trying new things and capitalizing on what is probably a fairly high need for novelty if you're a fearful avoidance, so that you can enjoy and explore and feel safe and comfortable to do so. So in the very last module here, we're going to talk about some key themes to keep in mind as it relates to having securely attached connections in our relationship to sex.